Hey everyone. Today we're going to dive into a story that's been buried under decades of imperialism, war, and political misdirection. A story about an emperor who didn't just rule a kingdom, but outsmarted one of history's most infamous fascists. This is the tale of Haile Selassie, Emperor of Ethiopia, a man who took on Benito Mussolini and, through courage, cunning, and an uncanny understanding of international diplomacy, made fascism bleed from the inside out. It's the kind of true story that reads like legend. And now you're about to walk through every step of it. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. Wherever you're watching from, whether it's late at night in Cape Town or early morning in Toronto, I want you to kick back, turn up the volume, and tune in. Now, let's listen to the compelling story in this video of mine. Section 1. You shuffle along the rocky ridges outside Addis Ababa. The year is 1935, and the air is so dry it cracks your lips when you breathe. Behind you, Ethiopia hums with ancient hymns and the stomping of barefoot soldiers, men wrapped in lion pelts, rifles slung over shoulders like staffs of prophecy. Before you, just across the border, the steel maw of fascism grinds forward. You're not just a warrior, you're the emperor. Haile Selassie I, conquering lion of the tribe of Judah, elect of God. And you know what's coming. Mussolini's Italy has tasted conquest in Libya and Somalia. Now it wants your kingdom, one of the last independent African nations. You've spent years warning Europe this day would come. They nodded politely, then ignored you. And now you feel the weight of prophecy settling on your shoulders like the golden robes of coronation. But this story isn't just about war. It's about being underestimated. They thought you were just another ruler clinging to ancient traditions. They didn't see the sharp intellect behind your soft-spoken manner. You studied Western politics while mastering Amharic poetry. You wrote military handbooks by candlelight and read the Geneva Conventions in 3 languages. You saw what was coming, and unlike the rest of the world, you prepared. You walk the palace courtyard one last time before the invasion. Monks chant beneath cedar arches. A lion, one of your personal guardians, paces restlessly in its enclosure. You whisper a command. Within minutes, your generals are summoned. Across the room, an officer rolls out a massive handmade map of the Northern Highlands. You're not a fool. Your armies are scattered, mostly farmers with rusted rifles and spears. The Italians? They have tanks, aircraft, mustard gas. But they don't have the mountains, or your people's soul. You remember the words of your father. The land may break, but the mountain stands. And in Ethiopia, every man thinks he is a mountain. Over the next few weeks, you travel from region to region, not just reviewing defenses, but awakening something older than any empire. You speak to elders beneath fig trees. You visit monasteries carved into cliffs. At each stop, you gather allies, not because they believe you'll win, but because they know surrender means slavery. They still remember the first Italian invasion in 1896. Ethiopia crushed them then. That memory is your armor. In the north, Ras Imru gathers 40,000 men. In the Central Highlands, priests pass messages laced with hidden commands. In the south, barefoot warriors hammer iron into spearheads under the cover of hymns. You don't have the best weapons, but you're not building an army. You're building a movement. You look over a list of advisors. Some urge immediate defense, others guerrilla war. You choose both. The Italians expect battles. They won't be ready for the silence of Ethiopia's shadows. One night, beneath flickering torchlight, you stand with a group of soldiers outside Mekelle. You tell them this isn't a war for land. It's a war for dignity. If we die, you say, let it be as lions, not dogs. And then war begins. The Italian planes arrive first. Like iron locusts, they blot out the sun. You watch helplessly as villages are set ablaze. Your people flee. Children wail under clouds of gas that turn green leaves into tombs. Your soldiers fight back, but how do you shoot a bomber with a sword? But it's not all despair. In the fog of smoke and fire, word spreads of an ambush in the mountains. Ethiopian fighters, using homemade grenades, collapse a cliffside onto a convoy of Italian trucks. No prisoners. The news jolts through the countryside like lightning. The emperor still resists. The lion still roars. In Addis Ababa, you visit a hospital where wounded soldiers lie beneath mosquito nets. One of them grips your hand and begs you not to surrender. His legs are gone, but his eyes burn. You promise him, This is not the end. That night, you look out over your capital. Fires flicker in the distance. The Italians are close. Your advisors urge you to flee. But you don't call it fleeing. You call it reshaping the battlefield. And so you leave, not to abandon your people, but to become their echo. The world has ignored Ethiopia's suffering, but soon it won't be able to look away. You step into a train car with no soldiers, no drums, no banners. Just a man with a suitcase and a mission. As the train pulls away, you pass through crowds who bow in silence. Some cry, some raise their arms in clenched fists, but none call you coward, because they know the lion will return. And Mussolini has no idea what's coming for him. You weren't born with a crown on your head. You earned it, step by step, in dusty corridors, smoky libraries, and the shadows of palace intrigue. Before the world called you Haile Selassie, they knew you as Tafari Makanin, a wiry young noble with eyes like storm clouds and a mind sharper than any general's blade. As a child, you watched Ethiopia with the wide eyes of a future architect. Your homeland wasn't a neat empire. It was a puzzle of independent provinces, each ruled by local nobles who didn't always obey the emperor. Chaos was common. Unity was a dream. You decided early on, dreams needed scaffolding. Your tutors taught you Latin, French, and English alongside traditional Ge'ez scripture. While other boys trained with spears, you studied legal codes and military dispatches from France. Your notebooks were filled with drawings of bridges, not swords. Still, your ambition was no secret. People laughed behind your back. That little scholar wants to be king. But you kept reading. You kept listening. And then, opportunity knocked. In 1906, the young Tafari was appointed governor of the remote province of Sidamo. It was a test. If you could govern a land of rebels, bandits, and ancient tribal rivalries, maybe you had potential. You arrived on horseback. No army, no bravado, just a small group of clerks, a printing press, and crates of school books. You didn't crush rebellion. You out-administered it. You built roads, opened schools, started mail service. Soon, the once lawless province ran smoother than the capital. They stopped laughing. By 1916, Ethiopia's power elite faced a crisis. The reigning emperor, Iyasu, was reckless, inexperienced, and suspected of aligning with Muslim leaders during World War I. In a mostly Christian empire, that didn't go down well. So the nobility staged a coup, and they needed someone with both brains and bloodline to help rebuild the monarchy's image. They came to you. You became regent plenipotentiary, essentially running the country while the new empress, Zauditu, held the throne. It was a delicate arrangement. She had the crown, you had the pen. Now, most men would have waged palace war, grabbing for power overnight. But you didn't storm the court, you modernized it. You brought electricity to the palace. You opened Ethiopia's first newspaper. You sent envoys to Europe and invited foreign educators to train your military. And all the while, you smiled patiently, bowed respectfully, and built your foundation. Every move was precise. You formed alliances with key noble families through marriages, land gifts, and public praise. You spoke softly, but made sure your rivals' secrets never stayed buried. Over time, your influence eclipsed the empress. But when she died in 1930, there was no need for a power struggle. You were already the emperor, in all but name. Your coronation was unlike anything Ethiopia or the world had seen. At dawn on November 2nd, 1930, the air in Addis Ababa vibrated with drums, hymns, and the scent of burning incense. Foreign dignitaries arrived in velvet-lined convoys. Ethiopian nobles wore gold-threaded cloaks. You knelt before the high priests of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, who anointed you with holy oil and declared you King of Kings, Lord of Lords, conquering Lion of the tribe of Judah, elect of God. Haile Selassie first. And make no mistake, this wasn't just about ceremony. This was your first strike in a psychological war against colonialism. You made sure European journalists were there to see it all. You knew they'd never forget the sight of an African emperor commanding as much authority and dignity as any king in Europe. You sent a message. Ethiopia would not be ruled. It would rule itself. Then came the harder part, delivering on that promise. You launched a whirlwind of reforms. The country's first written constitution in 1931, a centralized treasury, a new court system. You expanded education and started building an airline. And even though many of your nobles grumbled, you outmaneuvered them just like you had the empress, slowly, calmly, relentlessly. But as you built, you also watched. To the north, Mussolini was consolidating his power. You saw the signs. Italy, already occupying Eritrea and Somalia, was arming its borders. In speeches, Ildushis spoke of resurrecting Rome's old empire, and Ethiopia, with its riches, independence, and symbolic value, was his white whale. You weren't intimidated. You were infuriated. At one point, you convened a military council and pointed to a map showing Italian troop movements. They want to teach us civilization? You snapped. Let them first learn dignity. Still, you knew the numbers. Ethiopia had ancient pride, but modern vulnerability. Your soldiers were brave, but poorly equipped. The roads you built could carry progress or invading tanks. So you tried diplomacy. You reached out to the League of Nations. You issued formal warnings. You sent envoys to Britain and France who offered lukewarm promises of support. And Mussolini? He mocked you, called you a barbarian dressed in royal robes, whispered lies that you tortured prisoners, harbored communists, plotted against the West. But you stayed composed because you had a secret plan. You didn't just train soldiers, you trained scribes, filmmakers, teachers. You didn't just reinforce forts, you reinforced national identity. When Mussolini sent propaganda, you sent music and poetry. You made sure every Ethiopian child heard stories of Adwa, where their grandparents had crushed the Italians once before. You weren't just preparing for war, you were preparing for memory. Because you knew that one day, long after the guns stopped firing, people would ask, did Ethiopia kneel? And you wanted the answer to be, never. You wake to thunder, but not from the sky. Not this time. It's the grind of treads over dry rock, the rumble of steel engines crossing your borders. It's October 1935, and Mussolini has given the order, invade Ethiopia. The world watches through monocles and newspapers. Headlines scream of Abyssinian crisis, and diplomats shuffle papers, hoping this isn't how the next world war starts. But for you, it's no longer theoretical. It's hoofprints on scorched trails. It's Italian bombers streaking across the blue skies of Tigray. And it's personal. Mussolini doesn't just want land. He wants a trophy, a crown to hang on his wall. You are that crown. Ethiopia is that prize. He's called it a short colonial police action, as if he were walking into an empty village with a white flag. But you're not an empty village. You're the last free African nation. And you don't carry a white flag. You carry fire. From their bases in Eritrea, the Italians march south with over 500,000 troops. That's more than any modern army Ethiopia has ever faced. They have tanks, bombers, field artillery. They even have their own propaganda units filming the whole thing like a Roman epic. You? You have maybe a fifth of that number. Most of your soldiers don't wear boots. They carry antique rifles, swords, even sharpened farming tools. Some ride mules. Some walk for days barefoot to join your cause. But they all chant the same thing. We are Adwa's children. You make your headquarters in the north, near Dessie, where your best generals prepare the first lines of resistance. You rotate between tents and stone monasteries, always moving, never predictable. Each morning, you drink black coffee, kiss the ancient psalter, and pore over hand-drawn maps. They say this is a hopeless war, but you know Mussolini's weakness, arrogance. He believes this will be over in weeks. He believes Ethiopians will panic, that tribal rivalries will explode, that no black king could possibly organize a modern defense. He doesn't know what you've been doing for the last 10 years. You've planted seeds, networks of spies, hidden supply lines, mountain strongholds, emergency hospitals. You've trained officers in France and built a basic air corps. Your planes are outnumbered, but your men are fearless. One pilot, in a patched-up biplane, crashes into an Italian convoy, taking out 2 tanks. That same day, Ras Cassa's troops ambush an Italian patrol at the Tekeze River. Only one soldier survives to tell the story. Still, the weight of modern warfare presses in. The Italians use poison gas, dropped from planes or sprayed from trucks. Entire villages are erased. Forests where guerrillas hide are burned or gassed. Priests collapse mid-prayer. Women blister in seconds. Even Red Cross camps aren't spared. You receive a report. A school has been hit. A child's shoes melt into his skin. You fold the report, close your eyes, and whisper to yourself, let the world see this. Because you're not just fighting for land. You're fighting for witness. In the capital, your advisors beg you to flee to the mountains, to command a guerrilla war. But you refuse. Not yet. You need the world to look you in the eye while your country bleeds. You need to stand at the front so that no one can say, later, we didn't know. You make a fateful choice. Prepare to go to Geneva. The League of Nations, the supposed World Peace Council, has promised collective security. You plan to speak there yourself, not as a beggar, not even as a king, but as a man of history. But before you go, you must leave Ethiopia with honor. You ride north to speak with your generals. Ras Imru vows to hold the last line. Ras Desta cries and kisses your feet. You lift his chin and whisper, "This is not defeat. This is a turning." Then you visit the battlefield at Meichu, where the fate of the kingdom hangs. Your troops are exhausted, starving. Some are boys no older than 15. Still, they fight like lions. In a single day, they hold off 3 Italian divisions, but they can't stop the planes, or the gas, or the endless convoys of enemy reinforcements. The line breaks. You don't panic. You pivot. The decision to leave is agonizing, but essential. You leave under disguise. Just a few loyal soldiers, a narrow path through hostile land. Some nights you ride under moonlight. Others you sleep beneath shrubs, your crown buried in the dirt beside you. A mule carries your most prized possession, a Bible wrapped in your mother's shawl. Eventually, you reach Djibouti. From there, a British ship waits to take you into exile. You don't cry. You don't pray. You only ask the captain, "Will the world hear me if I speak plainly?" He says, "They'll have to." As your ship leaves the Red Sea, you look back at the land fading behind you, burning fields, ruined churches, dead radio towers. You whisper, "I will return." And then you vanish into the fog. But not into silence, not into surrender. Because now, Mussolini's greatest mistake is complete. He didn't kill the lion. He just gave him a megaphone. You sit in a train car winding through the English countryside, the silence interrupted only by the clack of the wheels and the soft shuffling of pages. You're reading reports of battles lost, of atrocities committed, of the land you once ruled, now under fascist boots. Outside the window, green fields roll by, but you see only the charred remains of Amba Aradam and the bombed-out villages of the Ogaden. You're an emperor in exile now. And yet, you feel no less a ruler, because your battlefield has changed. You are no longer fighting with swords or rifles. You're fighting with words, presence, strategy. The West expected you to disappear, to fade into some quiet estate or live in symbolic irrelevance. But you didn't come to Europe to mourn. You came to make sure the world couldn't look away. Your new palace? A modest brick townhouse in Bath, England. It's cold, drafty, and a far cry from the incense-laced halls of Addis Ababa. But you turn it into a war room, maps on walls, wires trailing from radios, Ethiopian aides sleeping on the floor. You rise early, drink thick coffee, and begin composing letters, declarations, speeches. The war may be on Ethiopian soil, but the story is being written here. Mussolini has declared Ethiopia part of his new Italian East Africa, an insult not just to your people, but to African sovereignty everywhere. He stages parades in Addis, installs puppet rulers, issues coins with his face on one side and the Lion of Judah mangled on the other. You could rage, you could beg, but instead you strategize. First, the League of Nations. You've waited months to get a speaking slot. Now, the moment has come. You dress not in mourning, but in full regalia. Green robe, gold embroidery, the same lion emblazoned cape from your coronation. You walk into Geneva not as a fallen monarch, but as a storm. The room falls silent, and you speak. Your voice is calm, but it cuts like a blade. You tell them about the gas attacks, the civilians slaughtered, the betrayal of international law. You remind them that if they let fascism win in Africa, it will not stop there. Today it is us. Tomorrow it will be you. You don't just shame them. You haunt them. Journalists scribble furiously. Radio microphones hum. For a brief moment, the world listens. But the League does nothing. No sanctions, no troops, no real consequences. Britain and France, afraid of pushing Mussolini into Hitler's arms, choose caution over justice. They wring their hands, issue statements, and do nothing. You receive the news in your office in Bath. You stare at the paper, then calmly set it down. They have chosen convenience, you say, over courage. So you go to Plan B. You begin the long, patient campaign of counter-propaganda. You speak at universities, churches, workers' rallies. In Paris, you meet with leftist intellectuals. In London, you lecture on African sovereignty. You charm journalists. You whisper to diplomats. You even appear in short films and radio broadcasts. No detail is too small. You understand something few world leaders do, that war is not just fought in trenches, it's fought in mythology, and you're reshaping yours. In Jamaica, word of your stand against fascism transforms you into a messianic figure. A new movement is born, the Rastafari, naming themselves after your birth name, Tafari. They see in you not just a man, but a sign, the Black King who defies the white empires. You've become unintentionally a symbol of hope far beyond your borders. Meanwhile, in Ethiopia, resistance simmers. You get coded messages from the countryside. Rebels are striking convoys. Churches are hiding arms. Farmers are assassinating collaborators with poisoned arrows. Women smuggle messages inside baskets of grain. In the highlands, barefoot warriors whisper your name like a prayer. You begin funneling what little aid you can via friends in the British Parliament, via sympathizers in the Red Cross. Sometimes it's just medicine. Sometimes it's money for boots. Sometimes it's radios that carry your voice into the hills. You don't lead from the battlefield now, but you lead nonetheless. In 1937, Mussolini tightens his grip. He sends more troops, more chemicals, executes priests, destroys sacred manuscripts. His aim is clear: erase Ethiopia from history. But in doing so, he creates martyrs. And you know history loves martyrs. You order a secret publication campaign. Ethiopian patriots smuggle pamphlets printed in exile back into the country, filled with your words, poems, songs, maps. They circulate like wildfire. One message is repeated over and over: the emperor lives. The emperor watches. The emperor will return. You've planted a seed deeper than roots: faith. And faith grows in silence. Mussolini may have captured your capital, but he can't capture that. Back in Britain, the winds begin to shift. Italy grows closer to Hitler. Germany annexes Austria. The world's axis is wobbling. And suddenly, your story isn't just a tragedy. It's a warning, a prophecy. You're no longer a defeated king. You're the man who stood up when no one else dared. The first head of state to speak out against fascist war crimes. The symbol of resistance. One night in 1938, you meet with a British general who finally asks, "If we help, can you still win?" You lean forward. "I don't need the world to fight for me," you say. "I only need the chance to fight for myself." You stand again before the gates of Geneva. Only this time, you don't walk in with hope. You walk in with receipts. It's 1936, and the League of Nations has already failed you. The applause from your first speech has faded. Mussolini still occupies Ethiopia. But you didn't come to win over diplomats this time. You came to haunt their silence, and haunt it you do. You show them photos of gassed villages. You name the schools turned to ash. You show the names, real names, of priests hanged from crosses, of entire communities erased not in battle, but with chemical fire. Your voice is calm, your face unreadable. But behind every sentence is rage forged into steel. You're not asking for sympathy anymore. You're not even demanding justice. You're recording history. Outside, protesters chant your name. Not Ethiopians, but Frenchmen, Swiss workers, even a few Americans holding signs: "Stop Mussolini." "Hands off Ethiopia." Inside the chamber, your speech ends and the room goes quiet again. But this time, there is no applause, just shame. And shame spreads faster than gas. You know nothing immediate will come of this. The League is broken. But it doesn't matter. You're playing the long game. You didn't come for votes. You came for the narrative. Mussolini's conquest wasn't just unjust, it was a farce. A modern industrial power turned poison and flame against one of the oldest Christian nations on earth, and needed everything to win. You're making sure the world remembers that, and the cracks are starting to show. Back in Italy, Mussolini boasts to crowds, but he knows Ethiopia isn't bending. Rebellions flare daily. He's forced to send more troops. His short war becomes a quagmire. He builds more jails than schools in Addis Ababa. You, meanwhile, are everywhere, on radio, in newspapers, on banners held by Black liberation movements across the globe. Harlem hosts rallies in your name. In the Caribbean, school children memorize your speeches. In India, independence leaders cite you as proof that colonized people can stand up to empire. You've gone from emperor to icon. Still, symbolism alone can't reclaim your throne. You begin working in secret with the British Foreign Office. It's slow, painful diplomacy. You sit through hours of condescension. You smile through insults disguised as jokes. One official refers to you as a curious little man with delusions of grandeur. But you play your part, because you know what they don't. You're not delusional, you're patient. You also know something else. War is coming, not just for Ethiopia, but for everyone. In 1939, Hitler invades Poland. Britain declares war on Germany. Suddenly, Mussolini's imperial triumph in Ethiopia becomes an unwelcome liability. Italian forces now sit exposed in East Africa. And Ethiopia, your Ethiopia, has become strategic terrain. You press your advantage. You meet with Winston Churchill's envoys. You offer your cooperation. Intelligence from Ethiopia, local guides, anti-fascist warriors. You don't ask for charity. You offer value. Eventually, one British commander looks at your briefing maps and says, if you can light the fire, we'll give it air. And you do. You've been in exile for 5 years now, but your loyalists haven't stopped. They've formed underground cells, hidden weapons in cave churches, trained in guerrilla tactics using old Italian manuals. And now, with British support forming in Sudan, you're about to coordinate something unimaginable, a two-pronged war for liberation. You signal to the scattered resistance using coded messages on shortwave radio. Your voice crackles across the highlands. The lion lives, the lion returns. The first sabotage happens days later. An Italian train explodes in the Rift Valley. A convoy vanishes in the Semien Mountains. Monasteries shelter rebels. Spies in the post offices forward troop movement data directly to British intelligence. Every whisper is a weapon. Meanwhile, in London, you meet with resistance figures from other occupied countries. Poles, Czechs, Free French. You all share the same grim smile. Europe is waking up to what you already learned in 1935. Fascism only stops when it's forced to stop. And your day is coming. In December 1940, British and Free French forces begin preparing for a campaign across East Africa. They want to strike Eritrea, Somalia, and then roll into Ethiopia. But they don't want to lead it alone. They want you with them. At last, after 5 long years, you pack your things: a gold pendant, a rusted revolver, and your mother's shawl. As you step onto the plane headed for Sudan, you close your eyes and say the words you've waited half a decade to speak. Take me home. You touch down in Sudan in the dead of night. No trumpets, no parades. Just dust, wind, and the quiet hum of generators in a British Army outpost near Khartoum. You step out wearing a simple uniform, your imperial robes folded away. No need for gold right now. You're not here to impress the world. You're here to finish what Mussolini started. And you're not alone. From the shadows emerge the men you once commanded: officers, priests, patriots who've survived 5 years of hiding, sabotage, and blood. Some are grizzled now, others missing limbs. But all kneel when you approach. You stop them. You shake their hands instead. One of them whispers, "We never doubted you'd return." You nod. Then rise. We return together. This is it, the start of the Ethiopian counteroffensive, your people's long-delayed answer to fascist invasion. By early 1941, the Gideon Force forms, a hybrid British-Ethiopian unit led by the eccentric but brilliant Major Ord Wingate. He's as unorthodox as they come, toting a Bible in one hand, a revolver in the other, quoting scripture in battle. But more important than his quirks, he believes in you, and he's ready to march into fire. The first operation targets Italian garrisons along the Blue Nile. Your troops, some barefoot, some armed with vintage rifles, others with nothing but daggers, move silently through jungles and mountains. Night after night, you watch Wingate lead precision raids. Italian soldiers wake up to find bridges collapsed, ammo depots vanished, or local guides who suddenly turn into saboteurs. They call it the Whispering War. You call it justice. You move with your forces, not from the rear, but near the front. You sleep in tents, share rations, wash with cold river water. When one soldier collapses from fever, you sit beside him until his breathing evens out. This isn't for politics. It's for unity. Your people need to see their emperor in the dirt with them. And they do. Each village you liberate is an eruption. Drums pound, cattle are slaughtered in celebration. Elderly women weep and kiss your boots, children chant your name, and at every stop you reassure them, we are not reclaiming the past, we are building the future. Meanwhile, Mussolini's grip weakens. He's bogged down in Europe, tangled in Hitler's wars, and his East African commanders are starved of resources. Italian morale is cracking. Commanders write desperate reports to Rome. The Ethiopians fight like ghosts. The British have turned them into an army. You read these reports with silent satisfaction. You press deeper into the mountains. Town by town, stronghold by stronghold, your forces reclaim ground. Debre Marcos, Gondar, Jima. The resistance swells with every victory. Bandits turn patriots. Farmers become scouts. Priests smuggle ammunition beneath their vestments. In one daring mission, Ethiopian rebels steal a radio transmitter and begin broadcasting victory reports. The voice of Haile Selassie echoes through the highlands once more. To many, it feels like prophecy fulfilled. But the true test still lies ahead. Addis Ababa, the capital, the beating heart of your empire, now surrounded by demoralized but still dangerous Italian divisions. You plan the approach carefully. The British push from the east, you and your patriots converge from the west. Every route is mined, every hill potentially a trap. But your forces push with an energy no Italian general can understand. This isn't just war, it's homecoming. As you near Addis, reports stream in. The Italians are retreating. Some burn documents, others abandon posts without firing a shot. Word is Mussolini has stopped issuing orders. He knows what's coming. And so, on May 21, 5 years to the day since you left your capital in exile, you ride back into Addis Ababa. You don't ride a war horse or a parade float. You ride a jeep, symbol of modernity, flanked by barefoot patriots and British allies who now salute you as a fellow commander. As you enter the palace gates, crowds erupt. They line the streets, waving branches, weeping, singing hymns. You dismount, walk through the gates, and kneel, pressing your forehead to the courtyard stones. You're not just emperor again. You're the living proof that a colonized people can fight, survive, and win. You deliver your first speech from the balcony that evening. No triumph, no revenge. Just these words, Ethiopia stretches her hands to God and thanks him for returning her children. The world watches in disbelief. A black king exiled by fascism has returned in victory. The only head of state ousted by Axis powers who would reclaim his throne while still alive. Not a puppet, not a compromise. A resurrection. And yet, you know this is just the beginning. Your palace is scarred, your schools burned, your people traumatized, but they are also alive. And with you returned, the rebuilding can begin. That night, as celebrations rage in the streets, you walk the quiet halls of your old home. You pass portraits torn down by Italian soldiers. Rooms once ransacked, now filled with flower garlands left by women who believe you were sent by God. You step into your study, the same one where 5 years earlier you signed your last edict before exile. You run your fingers across the desk. Then you sit, open a fresh notebook, and begin to write. Because now the battle is won. But the war for Ethiopia's soul is just beginning. The guns have quieted, but the struggle continues, now in whispers and contracts, in courts and cabinets. You've returned to your throne, but your kingdom has changed. And so must you. The scars of occupation are everywhere. Whole towns have vanished, schools have burned, churches defiled. Tens of thousands of your people are dead, and thousands more carry invisible wounds. Grief, silence, shame. The Italians may have been driven out, but their poison lingers. You step into this fragile new world not with vengeance, but with vision. The world expects a purge. Mussolini's soldiers committed atrocities. Many collaborators remain. But you don't reach for the sword. You reach for justice. In one of your first acts, you create special tribunals, not mob trials, but courts of law, where evidence is weighed and verdicts delivered with dignity. Some collaborators are exiled, some imprisoned, a few executed. But most, you forgive them. Why? Because you understand that the future cannot be built on the bones of yesterday's bitterness. Ethiopia must move forward, united, and forgiveness becomes your sharpest weapon. You meet with local elders and tribal leaders, many of whom once doubted your authority, even sided with the Italians in hopes of autonomy. Instead of punishing them, you bring them into the fold. You give them positions, titles, responsibility. If you help destroy, you tell them, now help rebuild. You call it restoration, but it's more than that. It's revolution in slow motion. You rebuild your ministries from scratch. The Italian bureaucracy is dismantled. Former fascist buildings become schools and hospitals. You bring in exiled professors, priests, engineers who had fled to Europe. The diaspora returns, carrying ideas, textbooks, tools. In public, you speak of faith. But behind palace walls, you're strategizing a nation reborn from the fire. One of your most radical reforms? Land. You initiate a re-registration process, meant to reassert central authority, but also to break up monopolies built under occupation. You don't go full redistribution. That would provoke revolt among the nobility, but you begin shifting the narrative. Ethiopia isn't just a land of emperors and lords anymore. It's a modern state. Still, not everyone is ready for that. Within your own ranks, old aristocrats grumble. He's too forgiving, too soft on traitors, too obsessed with foreigners. You hear them, of course, and you smile, because you know power doesn't always come from silencing opposition. Sometimes you let them talk while you move. You also have international challenges. Britain, who helped you reclaim your throne, now wants favors. They want military bases, trade concessions, influence in your government. You nod politely. You make promises that never quite materialize. You play the long diplomatic game, the same way you did in exile, always balancing, never submitting. And then there's the League of Nations. You return to that chamber again, this time not as a beggar or a warning, but as proof. You tell them Ethiopia survived because it believed in itself, even when no one else did. You warn them again, fascism is not dead, only scattered. What happened to Ethiopia can happen to anyone. The speech echoes louder now, because it's 1945. The war in Europe is ending. Mussolini is dead. Hitler has shot himself in a bunker, and the world is finally reckoning with what you knew back in 1935, that appeasement is betrayal, and silence is complicity. You're no longer the outlier. You're the prophet proven right. And you seize the moment. You advocate for a new international order. You throw Ethiopia's support behind the formation of the United Nations, becoming one of its first founding members. You argue fiercely that African voices must be heard, that independence is not a gift, but a right. For once, the world listens. You even send Ethiopian peacekeepers to the Korean War a few years later. You say it publicly. Ethiopia will stand against tyranny wherever it rises. And people believe you, because you already did. Back home, the work continues. You invest in education. You open more schools in 5 years than the previous century combined. You send students abroad on scholarships. You build colleges. You elevate the Amharic language as a unifier, but allow local dialects to flourish. You're building a nation, not just of warriors, but of thinkers. And it's working. Slowly, painfully, but it's working. Still, the ghosts remain. Every now and then, you walk the quiet halls of the palace, past photographs of men who didn't survive the occupation, past archives where letters from exile sit in dusty boxes. You run your fingers along the window panes and look out over the city. It's still scarred, but it's yours again. You sometimes dream of the battlefield, of mustard gas in the air, of children's shoes melted in the dust. But you wake and remind yourself, you didn't just outlive Mussolini, you outlasted him. And that, more than any battlefield victory, is the true triumph. The empire breathes again, but you don't slow down. You've reclaimed your throne, rebuilt your government, and restored Ethiopia's international standing. But now comes the challenge that breaks lesser men, the challenge of governing peace. It's 1946. The world is redrawing itself. Borders shift, empires collapse. Movements begin to spark across Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean. And Ethiopia, once dismissed as a relic, is now seen as a beacon. You feel the weight of that symbol pressing on your shoulders. So you move decisively. You launch the second 5-year plan, an ambitious agenda to modernize infrastructure, education, agriculture, and industry. Roads are carved into mountains. Telecommunication lines snake across valleys. New airports open, linking Ethiopia to Cairo, Rome, even New York. You create a national bank, standardize currency, modernize taxes. Civil servants are retrained, corruption punished, though not always removed. And most importantly, you invest in people. You personally oversee the expansion of Haile Selassie University, a place meant to train the next generation of doctors, engineers, administrators. You speak at graduations, you dine with students, you remind them that a nation cannot survive on myth alone. A sword wins freedom, you say, but a mind defends it. And yet, you never forget your spiritual foundation. You restore churches desecrated during occupation. You fund the reconstruction of ancient manuscripts, monastic libraries, sacred texts. You ensure the Ethiopian Orthodox Church thrives, but you also begin conversations with Muslims and Protestants, signaling a future of religious coexistence. Not everyone is ready for it. In the highlands, conservative nobility still treat your reforms with suspicion. They see your embrace of the West as betrayal. Some whisper that you've become too modern, too friendly with foreigners, too soft on rebels. But you've heard this before. Let them whisper, because the world is watching, and you intend to lead. In 1954, you do something that shocks both friend and foe. You tour Europe and the United States as a visiting head of state. In Washington, President Eisenhower greets you with full honors. In Paris, the press rush to photograph you beside the Eiffel Tower. In London, the same people who once doubted your crown now rise in applause. You've become more than emperor. You are the living symbol of African dignity, black sovereignty, and Christian kingship in a secular, skeptical age. You use the opportunity to press your message. You remind the West that Africa is not a backwater, it is a rising force. You advocate for African decolonization long before it's fashionable. In meeting after meeting, you ask the same question: how long can a world at peace still justify oppression? Back home, your speeches are printed in classrooms. Your portrait hangs beside chalkboards and altar stones. For millions, you are no longer just Haile Selassie. You are the father of the nation. But a father must also prepare for the unexpected. You begin military reform, increasing salaries, modernizing training, importing tanks and aircraft. You send officers to Israel, to Britain, to the US. You're not preparing for immediate war, but you've learned peace is never permanent. You also begin to feel the tides of Pan-Africanism rising. Across the continent, revolution stirs. Ghana gains independence in 1957. Guinea follows. Kenya smolders with the Mau Mau uprising. Algeria bleeds under French occupation. Black Africa is on fire, and your voice, your survival, your history, all make you a torchbearer. So you lean in. You convene meetings with Kwame Nkrumah, Patrice Lumumba, and other leaders of the new Africa. You help create the Organization of African Unity in 1963, headquartered not in Accra or Lagos, but in Addis Ababa. You welcome presidents, ex-rebels, philosophers, freedom fighters, all of them calling you Your Majesty, but seeing in you something more: a survivor, a signal. In your opening speech, you say, Africa must unite or perish. The imperialists never rest. They wear new faces, but dream the same dreams. The crowd erupts. Outside, Ethiopians fill the streets, fireworks blaze, drums echo into the night. The Lion of Judah roars once again, not just for Ethiopia, but for all Africa. And still, you do not rest. You travel to newly independent nations. You offer teachers to Nigeria, nurses to Somalia, mediators to the Congo. Wherever chaos threatens to crack these new nations, Ethiopia sends not armies, but guidance. You even help mediate border disputes. In one case, your intervention prevents an outright war between two of your own neighbors. Diplomats privately joke that your voice is more powerful than their treaties. But for you, this is no joke. You've seen how fragile peace is. You've watched how quickly hope can be swallowed by greed, by foreign meddling, by internal division. And so you fight, not with guns, but with principle, with persistence, with presence. At 70 years old, you still rise before dawn. You still take reports by hand. You still meet ministers face to face. You still walk your gardens every morning, whispering scripture to yourself, looking for signs in the mist. You know something most men in power never admit. This doesn't last. And so you treasure each breath of national unity like it's your last. For now, the empire is strong, but the storm clouds are never far away, and you are watching the sky. By the 1960s, the world is reshaped, but your kingdom is still standing. You, Haile Selassie, are now one of the longest reigning sovereigns alive. While monarchies fall in revolutions and leaders fade into retirement, you're still seated at your marble desk in Addis Ababa, robes crisp, beard trimmed, the Lion of Judah flag billowing over a city you pulled back from fire. But beneath the fanfare and the foreign medals, cracks begin to show. The new generation, young, urban, educated, grows restless. They admire you, yes. They remember the Liberation War, but they want more. More change, more opportunity, more voice. And they want it now. You sense it first at the university. Students who once bowed now raise questions. Why do the nobility still own most of the land? Why does hunger still haunt the countryside? Why are journalists arrested for speaking too boldly? You hear the whispers. Is he growing too old? Has the lion gone soft? You ignore them, for now. Instead, you keep your focus global. The world still needs you. You represent continuity. In 1963, you host JFK's widow, Jackie Kennedy, like a daughter. In 1966, you visit Jamaica, and the moment becomes surreal. At the airport, over 100,000 Rastafarians await you. They don't cheer, they cry, they wail. Some faint, some drop to their knees. For them, this is no state visit, it's revelation. You're not just a leader, you're divine, a king foretold in scripture, a symbol of African salvation. You step out of your plane into incense clouds and reggae rhythms. They call you Jah. They chant psalms in Amharic. One man lifts a baby and shouts, "He will grow under your name." You don't correct them. You don't claim divinity either. Instead, you smile gently, wave, and say, "I am your brother. I am your servant." The world watches in awe. And yet, back home, real tensions simmer. Ethiopia is now two nations, modernizing cities with universities and cinemas, and rural provinces where families still plow by ox and read by candlelight, if they can read at all. Your grand reforms have done much, but not enough. You've centralized power, but alienated provincial leaders. You've modernized education, but haven't created enough jobs for the graduates. You've embraced foreign aid, but it hasn't reached the farmers in the lowlands. You still walk the palace halls every morning, but now your steps are slower. At 75, you're still sharp, still alert, but you begin to delegate more. Loyal ministers become gatekeepers, bureaucrats grow thicker in number, and slowly the empire begins to rust. Then the rains fail. Famine strikes the northern provinces, Tigray, Wallo, parts of Gondar, crops wither, rivers shrink to gravel, livestock drop where they stand. And worst of all, no one in the capital reacts fast enough. Reports take months to reach you. By the time the crisis becomes undeniable, tens of thousands are dead. Foreign journalists sneak into the region and film the starvation, emaciated children, bleeding feet, weeping mothers. The footage hits Western television, and suddenly the image of Haile Selassie, the world's most dignified African monarch, is juxtaposed with dust-covered skeletons begging for grain in his kingdom. You are stunned. You summon ministers, demand explanations, fire half the cabinet, order emergency relief convoys. You personally visit the famine zones, step through mud-soaked villages, cradle dying children, apologize face to face. But it's too late. The damage isn't just physical, it's psychological. The world begins to ask, is the old emperor still fit to rule? Inside Ethiopia, that question is louder now. Student protests erupt at Haile Selassie University. They shout for land reform, for a constitution, for real democratic elections. They burn effigies of ministers. Some even shout your name with fists raised, not in reverence, but defiance. One night, you stay up late reading transcripts of their chants. You underline the phrase, "We are not your subjects, we are your future." You sigh, and you begin drafting a new address to the nation. In it, you don't lash out. You don't scold. You acknowledge. You speak of shared struggle, of generational change, of your hope that Ethiopia will one day be ruled not by kings, but by laws that bind rulers as tightly as they bind citizens. You deliver the speech on national radio. It's calm, reflective, humble. It makes headlines, then disappears into the storm. Because the pressure keeps building. The army is restless, salaries unpaid, units undersupplied, officers worry about loyalty, rumors of coup plots swirl like monsoon clouds. And within your palace, factions emerge. Some say it's time for succession. Others whisper of exile. Still others believe in cracking down with force. You do none of it, because you remember the first time you held power, not with weapons, but with patience. You believe in cycles. You believe the nation will correct itself. And above all, you believe Ethiopia will endure, no matter who wears the crown. But even lions must rest, and the jackals are circling. You wake before dawn, as always. The sun has yet to rise, and Addis Ababa is quiet, too quiet. You walk your garden path alone. The roses bloom as they always have. The guards salute you. The birds sing. But something in the air feels off, heavier, still. You've ruled for nearly half a century. You've outlived Mussolini, outlasted fascism, survived occupation, war, betrayal. But now, at age 82, you begin to sense the truth. This time, the enemy is inside the gates. The students have grown more radical, the newspapers more hostile, the army more embittered. Soldiers grumble over dinner, whispering of rising prices, failing paychecks, and the man who sits on the throne while others starve. They don't say it aloud, not yet, but the word hangs in the air like a knife. Enough. The famine of the early 70s, so brutal, so visible, has become the breaking point. Thousands died while your ministers stalled, while foreign reporters beat your own government to the truth. You acted, yes, but to many, too late. The emperor who once symbolized strength and foresight now seems detached, and your enemies know it. Within the palace, ministers argue behind doors. The Derg, a shadowy military council, grows bold. They speak of saving the revolution, of correcting national decay, of removing monarchy from modernity. They're not just ambitious, they're organized. Then comes the summer of 1974. It starts with whispers, then mutinies. Soldiers refuse orders, officers seize regional posts, ministers vanish without warning. Tanks roll into the capital, not to parade, but to occupy. One morning, you sit at your writing desk, your coffee is warm, your pen ready, but your daily briefing is missing. Instead, a young officer steps into your office. He does not bow. "Your Majesty," he says stiffly, "you are to come with us." You look at him for a long time. There's no panic, no begging. You simply close your notebook, stand, and say, "Where is the empire I bled for?" The officer doesn't answer. You are led out of your palace, not in chains, but without honor. No fanfare, no crowds, just silence. They drive you to the Grand Palace, now turned into a holding compound. The rooms are bare, the windows barred. Your world, once filled with scrolls, scepters, and scripture, has been reduced to a bed, a chair, and guarded meals. Outside, the Derg consolidates power. One by one, your loyal ministers are arrested, some executed. Land is nationalized, nobility stripped, churches silenced, statues torn down. The empire is being unmade by the children you once tried to uplift. And yet, you do not break. You wake each day and read scripture. You wash your face with cold water. You pray aloud for your captors. When an officer delivers news of a friend's execution, you bow your head and whisper, "May he enter peace faster than I." They try to make you sign papers of abdication. You refuse. "I was chosen by God," you say. "Only God may dismiss me." Weeks pass. You are allowed no visitors, no letters, no radio. The Lion of Judah, once feared by fascists, once hailed in Geneva, once crowned by sacred oil, is now an old man watched by soldiers who do not know the cost of his silence. Then, on a rainy day in August 1975, you do not rise from your bed. The guards find you still, your breath shallow. You whisper something, too faint to hear. A psalm, maybe, a farewell, or simply a prayer. You slip into unconsciousness. And then, you're gone. The official statement will say you died in your sleep, that it was natural, that age claimed the last emperor. But the truth? To this day, no one knows exactly what happened that night. Some say it was poison. Others, a smothering. Some believe you were buried under the palace floor. Others claim your body was hidden by soldiers too ashamed to admit what they'd done. For 25 years, your tomb remained unmarked, your name erased from public life. But your legacy? Impossible to silence. Years later, when Ethiopia begins to heal from the trauma of the Derg regime, your story rises again. And slowly, the truth is restored. Your remains are recovered, your title remembered, your name spoken, not just as emperor, but as enduring symbol, not of monarchy alone, but of resistance, vision, and a kingdom that outlived its invaders. Because in the end, the empire you built was never only of stone or soil. It lived in hearts, in stories, in symbols carved by the generations who followed. And one truth remains unshaken. You, Haile Selassie, were the emperor who fooled Mussolini, the one who turned exile into victory, the one who stood when the world bowed to fascism and never bowed yourself. You are gone, yet you are everywhere. Your body lies in secrecy beneath palace floors, but your name ricochets through the corridors of the very regime that tried to silence it. Inside the ministries, now draped with red banners and hammer and sickle slogans, young officers curse quietly when power cuts, when grain convoys vanish, when villagers whisper your psalms instead of their revolutionary chants. They call themselves the Derg, the Coordinating Committee of the Armed Forces, but you know them as frightened boys hiding behind acronyms. They parade your lion standards through the streets and burn them in bonfires, convinced ashes will erase memory. They do not understand that memory feeds on fire. From your invisible perch, you watch their first decree, year zero. They nationalize land, seize aristocratic estates, ban the titles you once bestowed. At first, the peasants cheer, no more taxes to the lords who betrayed them. Yet within months, they see new bureaucrats, guns slung over shoulders, issuing quotas harsher than any feudal tithe. In villages from Gondar to Bale, elders shake their heads and murmur, "Under the emperor we starved, but at least we prayed." The Derg forbids those words. Still they spread, whispered beneath thatched roofs at night like contraband seeds. You float above Addis Ababa as tanks idle along Churchill Avenue. Mengistu Haile Mariam, broad-shouldered, steel-eyed, emerges as the junta's loudest voice. "The monarchy is dead," he bellows, slamming an empty bottle of blood on the podium to symbolize class vengeance. Crowds roar, but you sense the tremor in his chest. Even he feels your shadow. He orders statues toppled, palaces looted, your portraits ripped from classrooms. For every lion he melts into scrap, a child somewhere sketches the crowned profile you wore on postage stamps. The harder they strike, the deeper the image etches itself into collective bone. Then the Red Terror begins. Students who once marched against your rule now discover a tyranny far colder. Secret police scour dormitories, lining corridors with bodies wrapped in newspaper. Mothers are commanded to scrub their children's blood from sidewalks at dawn. Nights echo with gunfire and the click of typewriters filling ledgers of the dead. You listen, powerless yet painfully aware. This horror feeds on the vacuum left by your departure. Revolutionaries claim the future, but they lack the restraint that tempered your fury after victory. Mercy, once your sharpest weapon, is gone. Famine returns with biblical cruelty in 1984, harsher than the drought that first cracked your throne. This time, it is not only the sky's betrayal, but policies, forced villagization, confiscated harvests, roads reserved for troop convoys. Flies crawl over children's eyelids as Western cameras roll, broadcasting images that sting the conscience you once tried to awaken in Geneva. Rock stars organize concerts, millions send aid, yet the regime diverts grain to soldiers. Somewhere in the highlands, a widow clutches a faded photograph of you in full regalia and tells her starving grandson, "He would have cried with us." The boy does not remember your voice, but hunger teaches him belief. Beyond Ethiopia's borders, your spirit finds unexpected refuge. Reggae anthems pulse through Kingston, London, Harlem. Lyrics lifted line for line from the speech you gave at the League in 1936. Until the philosophy that holds one race superior is finally and permanently discredited. Bob Marley shouts those words to stadiums of sweating bodies swaying under green, gold, red banners. They call you Jah Rastafari, father of creation. You never claimed divinity, yet divinity claims you. Dreadlocked pilgrims make their way to Shashamani, the land grant you offered them in 1948, tending tomatoes and hope on African soil, while Mengistu's patrols rumble by suspiciously. Inside Soviet briefing rooms, analysts puzzle over you. How did an obsolete feudal monarch become a martyr of anti-colonial struggle while their Marxist ally in Addis bleeds legitimacy? They underestimate myth. Myth thrives where ideology falters. Your face appears on bootleg t-shirts smuggled from Nairobi, on cassette sermons in Eritrea, on graffiti in the slums of Addis. The lion sleeps but does not die. Each slogan is a quiet revolt, a prayer disguised as pop art. By late 1980s, the cracks widen. Eritrean guerrillas cut supply lines, Tigrayan rebels swarm armored columns. Soviet money dries up like the Awash River. Mengistu gazes at the portraits of Lenin and Marx, yet feels your eyes judging him from the dust of the archives. He orders frantic offensives, but loyalty erodes. Generals fly to Washington, promising peace. As the rebels near the capital in 1991, Mengistu flees under cover of darkness, like the Italians before him, leaving files still warm in their folders. Rebel soldiers storm the palace where you once paced marble halls. In a forgotten side room, they stumble upon a brass bed frame. Beneath floorboards lies a crude box, bones wrapped in khaki rags. A rusted coronation ring clings to skeletal fingers. Someone whispers, "The king." They stand in silence, rebels and looters alike, awed by what tyranny could hide but not destroy. Gently, they lift you into daylight. The new government, eager for legitimacy, promises a state funeral. Yet politics stalls. Years pass. Your remains rest in a small chapel while Ethiopia searches its soul. Scholars debate your reign, autocrat or reformer, patriarch or pragmatist. Meanwhile, parents name son Selassie again. Rastafarians make pilgrimages to Addis, weeping before your temporary tomb as choirs chant Gaz hymns you once sang under siege. Finally, in November 2000, 25 years after your mysterious death, you are laid to rest in Holy Trinity Cathedral beside Empress Menen. Crowds stretch for miles, clergy swing incense, generals salute. Old women ululate, tears shining, as if a lost era has stepped back into the sunlight. When the coffin draped in the imperial flag descends, a breeze stirs the cathedral's tall windows. Some swear they hear a lion's roar carried on the wind. History seldom grants perfect justice, but it remembers endurance. You fooled Mussolini with patience, shamed empires with prophecy, and outlived the regime that erased your name. Your story now belongs to archives, to reggae verses, to weathered hands clutching prayer books. Each tribute a refusal to forget. You sleep beneath marble, yet your empire lives on. Not in crowns, but in the stubborn pride of a nation that learned from you the art of standing tall when giants kneel. Years pass, and still your name holds weight. Not just in Ethiopia, but across a continent where thrones have crumbled, flags have changed, and revolution after revolution has rewritten history. You, Haile Selassie, were once seen as the last of a dying breed, a monarch in the age of missiles and microphones. And yet, in the quiet corners of dusty libraries, rebel camps, reggae lyrics, and whispered prayers, your legend persists. In the early 2000s, young Ethiopians begin rediscovering you, not through royal ceremony, but through questions. Why did a small African kingdom resist colonization while others fell? Who was the man who stood alone in Geneva? Why does his face appear on album covers in Kingston, murals in Harlem, posters in Nairobi? You become a mystery they want to solve. University students pore over your speeches, many of them hidden, untranslated, forgotten by the regimes that followed. They read about your reforms, the first written constitution in 1931, your efforts at building schools and courts, your advocacy for African independence decades before it swept the continent. And slowly, a new generation starts to see you not as a relic, but as something rarer, a transitional figure, the bridge between empire and liberation. You weren't perfect. They know that. The critiques remain valid. Too slow to modernize land reform, too trusting of loyalty, too centralized in power. But in hindsight, your faults become human, not tyrannical. You ruled in a time when survival itself was political strategy. And your greatest power? Your symbolism. No one else on the global stage in the 20th century embodied what you did. An African monarch, born of ancient lineage, fluent in Western diplomacy, defender of tradition and reform, Christian king who opened his gates to Jewish refugees, Muslim dignitaries, Black liberation leaders. That complexity is why you endure. Outside Ethiopia, you're still revered in unlikely places. In Jamaica, the Rastafarian movement continues to thrive. Haile Selassie remains divine to them, not just symbolic. His image shares walls with Christ and Marcus Garvey. You never claimed their theology. You never discouraged it either. But you once invited their pilgrims to live in Ethiopia, granting them land in Shashamane. Many of them still tend that soil, even now. In 2005, a documentary airs across the African diaspora titled The Emperor Who Warned the World. For many Westerners, it's the first time they hear the Geneva speech in full, the one you gave in 1936 as bombs fell on your people. Viewers sit in stunned silence as your voice, measured, prophetic, describes mustard gas on children, the cowardice of appeasers, the false promise of civilization. By the end, they realize you weren't just defending Ethiopia, you were predicting World War II. And you were right. The UN archives begin to circulate old film reels of you speaking with Kennedy, Nkrumah, de Gaulle, and Pope Paul VI. Black and white footage shows you in your later years, walking with slow dignity, surrounded by generals and ministers who now live only in books. Young African leaders study your poise. Not just what you said, but how you said it. Not just how you led, but how you endured. You become a touchstone for a different kind of strength. Not loud, not revolutionary, but steady, quiet, timeless. Like the Ark of the Covenant you once claimed rested in Axum's sanctum. Back in Ethiopia, the monarchy is not restored, and you wouldn't have asked for that anyway. You saw the future coming. You always did. The new generation doesn't want crowns. They want fairness, food, internet, dignity. But in their protest chants, your name still slips through. We remember. In 2019, during a political reconciliation tour, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed visits the site of your reburial. Cameras click, speeches echo off cathedral walls. But what moves the crowd isn't the politics. It's the hush, the shared awareness that the man in that tomb once stood alone for Africa when no one else would. You become a pilgrimage, not just of faith, but of memory. And across Africa, from Senegal to South Africa, your image resurfaces in murals, documentaries, curriculum units. Ghana's Pan-African Museum features your cape and scepter. Kenya's archives quote your UN address. Nigerian poets dedicate verses to you. You're no longer just a king. You're a signal that Africa was never passive. That black resistance predates black freedom. That standing alone can still matter, even if the world mocks you for it. Even your doubters, historians who critiqued your reign, begin to admit what few could see in your own lifetime. That holding Ethiopia together through the 20th century was like balancing a storm on a thread. And you did it with dignity. You inspired a musical movement. You embarrassed an empire. You endured exile, returned to liberate your people, helped launch the African Union, and warned the world of fascism before anyone else listened. And now, even in death, you remain what you were in life. Not just emperor of a nation, but guardian of its soul. You no longer walk the palace halls, but your footsteps echo through history. Quiet, deliberate, unmistakable. The world has changed again. The empires that once dismissed Ethiopia as backward have themselves collapsed into shadows of power, grappling with post-colonial reckonings. The League of Nations, whose silence once mocked your cries, has long since been replaced by the United Nations, where Ethiopia sits not as a pleading petitioner, but as a founding voice. You helped build that chamber. You spoke its truth before it had the courage to believe in itself. Now, nations that once conquered ask forgiveness. The Italians return, not with guns, but with apologies. A formal delegation visits your restored tomb. A wreath is laid. A minute of silence for the emperor they once tried to erase. No one dares to speak above the soft rustling of flags, because everyone in that room knows. You warned them. The poison gas, the death squads, the looted crosses and burned Bibles. The world forgot for decades. But your legacy endured long enough to remind them. And in that act of remembrance, something begins to shift. Your story is taught in classrooms again. Ethiopian schoolchildren study your speeches, analyze your reforms, visit your palaces not as relics of tyranny, but as symbols of a time when a leader stood alone against the tide and held. The very same corridors where your guards once clicked their heels in salute now echo with school tours, whispered prayers, the occasional quiet laugh of a child imagining life as a king. And yet your legacy isn't limited to Ethiopia's borders. Across Africa, the names you once spoke with reverence, Nkrumah, Lumumba, Nyerere, are now considered the fathers of independence. But even among them, you were the oldest, the first, the example, the elder statesman. While they emerged from colonial shackles, you were born free, crowned free, and fought to stay free. That gave you a unique burden. You were proof that Africans could govern themselves before Europe even admitted they had souls. Your kingdom had law before their empires had compass roses. Your priests were reading scripture when theirs were still navigating the dark ages. You weren't a colonial reaction. You were the original vision they feared. And still, even in triumph, you didn't close the door. You offered them friendship, a seat at the table, a second chance. Geneva in 1936 was not just a speech. It was an offer to the world to rise with you. They said no. You remembered. And yet, when they returned in 1941 to help drive out fascism, you forgave. The Ethiopian army marched beside Allied troops in World War II, not because you owed them, but because you believed humanity had to move forward, no matter how many times it stumbled. You made Ethiopia a player in global peacekeeping. You were among the first to send troops to Korea, to the Congo. You spoke to Kennedy and Khrushchev, to the Vatican and the African Union. You prayed in orthodox silence and roared in diplomatic chambers. There was no room you didn't belong in. And that presence, that quiet strength, has become a model, not of monarchy, but of dignified leadership. You see it now in the speeches of young African presidents who quote your maxims, in the way they speak of sovereignty, of self-determination, of moral clarity. You see it in how they wear traditional robes on global stages without apology, how they bring elders into parliament and talk about memory as governance. They may not be monarchs, but in spirit, they carry a fragment of your example. And even in the places where your legacy was most contested, you're being reevaluated. Scholars publish essays not just on your rule, but on your myth, how a man became a symbol, how a symbol became a religion, how a religion preserved a history the world tried to forget. Rastafarian elders give lectures in European universities. Your face, once banned from government buildings, now reappears on murals beside Mandela, MLK, and Garvey. In Jamaica, a young artist paints you as a storm-battered oak tree, scorched, broken-limbed, but still standing while flags fall like leaves around you. In Harlem, your name is written on press banners during marches for racial justice. Haile Selassie lives. They chant it not because you were perfect, but because you were true. True to your nation, true to your faith, true to your people. And now, your name belongs to them, not just to thrones or bloodlines, but to everyone who fights for something that seems impossible, to stand alone, to resist, to endure. You became the emperor who fooled Mussolini, but more than that, you became the symbol that fascism couldn't kill. And then, a strange thing happens. Long after your body is buried, after the regimes have come and gone, after the flags have changed and the wars have burned out, your voice begins to return. Not literally, of course. You're gone. But in the rhythm of speeches, in the cadence of prayers, in the certainty of people who've decided they too will not kneel, you live. It's not only in grand ceremonies or national tributes, it's in small, stubborn moments. A street vendor in Addis quoting your decree about the dignity of labor. A Rasta elder in Kingston reciting your Geneva warning from memory. A girl in Nairobi reading about the Battle of Adwa and daring to believe that she too can win when no one expects it. You, Haile Selassie, have become an idea. And like all powerful ideas, you now belong to everyone. In the highlands of Ethiopia, priests still whisper your name during ancient rites, even as the country redefines itself without emperors. In Shashamine, children plant vegetables in the soil you gifted their grandparents. In Kingston, DJs sample your words over rhythms that call back to prophecy. Even the skeptics begin to soften. Those who once wrote you off as an outdated monarch now reevaluate. He moved too slow, they said. But looking at the century now, they admit you were moving through a minefield of colonial pressure, tribal divides, Cold War puppetry. You didn't just rule a country. You walked a tightrope between ancient myth and modern survival. And you never fell. Not really. The Derg fell. Their red terror collapsed into infighting and exile. The ideologies they weaponized rusted away. The fear they sowed dissolved into memory. But your name, your flag, your legacy, they rose again. In 2013, during the 40th anniversary of the African Union, dozens of leaders gather in the very city you once called your capital, Addis Ababa. The lion flag doesn't fly officially anymore, but everyone knows whose city this still is. The AU building itself sits not far from the palace where you hosted African leaders in 1963. There, you spoke of unity, of dignity, of a future Africa made by Africans. Many of those leaders are now gone. Many of their dreams still remain out of reach. But you were right about one thing. Africa was always more powerful than the world admitted. And your presence in that moment, across speeches, posters, quotes, is felt. No one dares pretend otherwise. Even the Western world, which once saw you as exotic, now takes your example seriously. You're included in global histories of anti-fascist resistance. You're recognized by human rights organizations as one of the first world leaders to warn about the danger of indifference in the face of injustice. One particular clip, your 1936 address to the League, is played every year on the anniversary of the UN's founding. Some students, hearing it for the first time, think it must be fake. They say, "No way a black African king spoke like that in front of the world back then." But you did, and the footage is real. You didn't just speak truth to power. You carved it into marble. And still, you're not frozen in stone. Your legacy is alive because it's useful. It offers something few leaders ever leave behind, a model of resistance without cruelty, dignity without vengeance, faith without fanaticism. You were not just a product of your time. You were a challenge to it. Even now, new leaders stand in your shadow and ask themselves, Could I have done what he did? Could I have held the line when every powerful nation walked away? Could I have forgiven when I returned victorious? Could I have ruled not to dominate, but to serve? And in that question, you live again. Because the story of Haile Selassie isn't just about Ethiopia. It's about what happens when one person decides that principle matters more than comfort. When one nation dares to believe it can walk its own path. When one king refuses to kneel to an empire, and in doing so, becomes immortal. You began this journey as a boy named Lige Tafari Makanen, born in a remote province of an ancient kingdom, raised among priests and horsemen, taught to pray before you learned to rule. You became Ras Tafari, a prince with a vision that Ethiopia must move forward or perish. Then, through will and wisdom, through alliances and survival, you became Haile Selassie I, Emperor of Ethiopia, King of Kings, conquering lion of the tribe of Judah. But titles were never your armor. Conviction was. And now, from the mountain of memory, the full shape of your story reveals itself, not as a line, but a circle. Because where you started, others now begin. Where you fell, others rise. And where your voice once cried in the wilderness, millions now chant your name in unity. Think about it. You were crowned in 1930, in a ceremony older than most civilizations. Wearing robes embroidered with scriptures, holding a scepter believed to descend from Solomon himself. The world scoffed. A medieval king in a modern age? They asked. And yet when fascism came, when tanks rolled and treaties crumbled, it was you, not Churchill, not Roosevelt, not de Gaulle, who stood first before the world to warn them of the storm. You lost a war, then came back and won it. You took an empire bruised by invasion and stitched it back together, all while charting a course into a future even you knew might not include kings. You embraced reform, welcomed Pan-African dreams, and set the table for generations to come. You walked among gods in legend and rebels in real life. And when your throne was stolen, when the world turned its back on you once more, you didn't scream or curse or flee. You endured. Even in captivity, you remained an emperor. Even in death, you never disappeared. Because the strength of your rule didn't lie in a palace. It lay in your story, in your refusal to break, in the way you showed dignity under fire, in the moments when you chose mercy instead of wrath, legacy instead of revenge. And now, across Ethiopia, across Africa, across oceans and generations, that story echoes. In churches, in songs, in books, in murals, in silent tears shed by descendants who realize they are still here, in part because you held the line. You were the emperor who fooled Mussolini. But more than that, you were the emperor who reminded the world that Africa was never a footnote in someone else's book. It was always its own epic. It still is. And the next chapter, it's already being written by the students, the singers, the rebels, the farmers, the children with eyes full of fire and memory, who trace their footsteps on roads your hands paved. You live there now. Not in gold, not in titles, but in them. Cool down. So now, as the echoes of this story fade into the night, take a moment. Not to mourn, but to remember. Remember that leadership can be quiet and still be strong. That faith can guide a nation through darkness. That justice delayed is never justice denied, as long as someone is still willing to stand for it. You've heard a story of betrayal, triumph, exile, return, and rebirth. You've walked the halls of power and the dusty roads of retreat. You've seen the scars of empire, the cost of courage, and the legacy of resilience. Haile Selassie didn't live to see the full restoration of his name, but in many ways, he never needed to. Because the most powerful legacy is not a crown or a monument. It's a people who remember. So as you return to your world, your own struggles, your own choices, carry a piece of that spirit with you. Remember, even when the world turns its back, you can stand. Even when your voice shakes, speak. Even when you're surrounded by giants, don't kneel. Because truth doesn't always roar. Sometimes it walks quietly through palace gardens at dawn and changes the world anyway. Finish the script, enjoy listening, and subscribe to the channel for the next video.